Mr. Orlando Pandolfi, a Director of Music Programs at St. Paul's. Thank you for this session, this interview.
Hi, Jean. It's great to see you again.
Thank you. I think many families out there want to know really in person about the music program at St. Paul's, your amazing experience at boarding schools in music programs and in music in general. Can you share some about your backgrounds and what you do at St. Paul's?
Well, sure. Well, I've been in and out of this business over the last 38 years. So I've come to know the private schools pretty well. I've worked at 4 of them. St. Paul's I was particularly interested in because for a small school, it has one of the best supported music programs. And when I was at other schools, quite often some of the students I had hoped to get ended up at St. Paul's. So it's great to be here now.
You lead the music program and mainly orchestra.
Orchestra, jazz ensemble, wind ensemble when we have enough people to create one, and various chamber music groups. Again, depending on the talent pool that happens to be there.
Yes.
In any particular year. So it's a very flexible program, but the core of the program has mainly been an orchestra. We have strong strings and enough strong wind players to come in every once in a while and make it a symphony orchestra. This year we have, I think, about 57 students playing in the symphony orchestra. It's been as big as 65.
Okay. Oh, wow. 65.
Yeah, which is more than 10% of the school.
Oh, yes. Okay. How do you assess students and musicians into your program, and how do you evaluate, and what types of students take a part in your orchestra and music program?
Well, it's a pretty wide range. There are 2 components. There's who we get and how we deal with them once they're here, and then who we look for. And the main part of my job working with admissions is who I happen to be looking for.
Yes.
And like any basketball team and you're missing your center and you need somebody who's really tall and athletic, then that person is going to get a little extra attention. So in the case of music, I have to look at, what the orchestra was it going to be comprised of in the following year and what am I missing. And so there tend to be instruments that come up quite often. Viola, for instance. We're always on the lookout for strong viola players, because that's a little bit more unusual in terms of string. So I always encourage young players who are looking at violin to maybe consider viola, because it's a beautiful instrument.
Yes.
And it's also, pragmatically, it's a great hook for getting into schools like St. Paul's and even beyond in college.
Yes.
And it's the same with winds. There are certain winds that are just, you don't find a whole lot of. Right now, there seems to be a dearth of brass players. It's hard to find good. I was even talking to my counterpart at Exeter, and he says, we have very little strong brass players. So, and that happens to be my forte, French horn. But, trumpet, French horn, trombone, tuba. There was a time in the United States where we were teaming with those players and they were coming to these private schools, but now they tend to be staying more in the Midwest public school system, and we don't really get those kind of kids.
Right.
And since a big draw for most of our music programs comes from Asia,
yes,
and there's not a big brass tradition still. It's growing, and there's some fine players out there, but we're trying to get more young people to look into maybe pursuing another instrument besides piano, or violin.
So introduce musicians to St. Paul's. You look at their videos, listen to their sounds, and you assess
That's correct,
the
Jean.
students, right?
I get probably 95% of the students who are applying with some sort of interest in music send me a video. And these days it's very easy to do. They do a private or semi-public YouTube video, and they send me a link, and I look. And what we're looking for, is not really, we're not looking for conservatory level students. We're looking for good, strong students who have good sense of pitch, a good sense of rhythm, can get around their instrument in a way that we believe can help our ensemble. We're looking for, as I said before, specific instruments. So, for instance, a young Chinese French horn player came across, I came across him in this last cycle,
Oh,
and he
okay.
was terrific, you know. And so I put him on my toward the top of my wish list, and he's coming.
Oh, great.
So I get, you know, also
He's
we have a,
chosen
you know,
Paul's.
also a fabulous jazz drummer from China, who was just unbelievable. I heard the video and I said, you know, this girl can really, really help us, because we needed somebody coming in.
Okay.
You know, I was graduating our jazz ensemble drummer. So, you know, when you hear somebody and they're really interested in the school and we know they can help us, they're going to get a little boost from me
Right.
in terms of the admissions office. Now, of course, the caveat is they have to be admissible students.
Right. Of
They have to
course.
be strong enough academically. But I'm fortunate in that most musicians who apply are also very high in the percentile of their testing and the scores.
Yes.
And so if I pick, say, my 10 top musicians, chances are they're also going to be among the top performing, academically performing applicants.
Okay. So great
here.
musicians are also great students.
That tends to be the case. And you know, if they're coming in very, very strong, the chances of the colleges looking at them the same way I look at them for
right.
here.
Of course.
I used to work at Williams College. I
Yes.
taught at Amherst College, and so I have some friends there too. So when it comes time for instance, we have a young violinist who's a junior this year, who's excellent. He doesn't want to go the conservatory route, but he wants to get into a really good college, and
Yes.
Williams appeals to him. I happen to know the artistic director there. He's a very good friend. So, you know, I pick up the phone and I say, hey, you know, I've got a great kid for you to listen to. And because I have a good relationship with them, they know that I'm not just trying to sell a bag of goods.
Right.
And, you know, there's some
Recommend a
weight.
great student.
There's some weight behind the recommendation.
Is it, I guess, correct to say that students should reach out and see, because you are selective
Absolutely,
on
absolutely.
what instruments you need, and it differs each year. You, I guess, collaborate, work with admissions in bringing good musicians to St. Paul. So the students should actually reach out and see if they can bring a value, or
Right.
if they can grow and thrive at St. Paul's in their music.
I think when you're applying to schools like this, it's really important that you present your whole self.
Yes.
Now, once in a while, when we finally get kids and they come and play for us in September so we can place them, there are 2 or 3 kids who are really great surprises that they never identified as a musician, but they were actually quite
Good.
competent. So I'm always thrilled about those surprises. But basically, I listen to anywhere from 200 to 250 tapes. Because we have, I mean, we have a lot of kids applying.
Yes.
Out of that, I can usually identify 30 to 40 students who would really help us.
Right.
But I focus on those who will also fill an immediate need. So, for instance, if I have 5 really good saxophone players throughout the grades, and there's another good saxophone player coming, I mean, I'm happy to have them, but I'm not going to push for them quite as hard. But we can still serve them, and again, like I said, it's hard. I have to be very, very specific about who I ask for
Yes.
with admissions. Now, there are a lot of different criteria that they have to fit,
Yes.
but in terms of their talent and their ability, it has a lot to do with ensemble. For instance, and this is a little bit unfortunate, but a really, really good, solid pianist who comes here, we can serve them, but they're not somebody who's going to help the team, so to speak. In other words,
Right.
for a pianist to play in chamber music with our high-level strings, they have to be very, very good. And so I would take 6 violists, but maybe 1 pianist, or I shouldn't say take, I would say advocate for. And sometimes none, because we have some here already. And there's just, you know, so it's the team, it's, again, to use a sports analogy, you know, you want people who can play together, because the beauty of this program is it's an orchestra program, it's
Yes.
a collaboration. And that's really, really important. The individual is great, but the program is really a collaborative one.
Yes, I think that's the dilemma that many Asian students face. Schools back in Asia, where they're coming from, are so challenging and rigorous academically that they usually take private lessons
Right.
or practice on their own. But when they come to St. Paul's, they are asked to perform together as an orchestra.
Right.
So how do you work with students who are coming from such background where they're used to performing on their own?
Well, when they're string players, if they have enough experience, they can fit into the orchestra pretty well, pretty quickly, because they learn from each other. It's the peers are really important too. We address in private lessons, we address issues like pitch and rhythm, but if those things are solid, then in the orchestra, chances are they're going to be fine. The biggest issue, I think, with Asian students or Asian families is that they like to start their kids early.
Yes.
Yeah, and so consequently, there are really only two instruments where you can start
Early.
at a really, really early age, and that's the violin, because they make varied sizes violin, or any kind of keyboard instrument,
Okay, like
typically piano. Now, the wind and brass instruments that are very, very crucial for symphony orchestras and for concert bands and wind ensembles and things like that, you really, there's a certain age where it's just too young to manipulate the instrument, because they're too big. I mean, if you're an 8-year-old and you're trying to play clarinet, it's very, very difficult and very, very discouraging.
Yes.
And I know the American students, they tend to start 10, 11, 12. The most successful programs I've seen, the students actually start, they wait until they're 12, and they do pre-instruments, just because the frustration
Right.
of trying to overcome this crazy piece of apparatus can be very discouraging. Now, culturally, I've noticed also that my Korean students or my Chinese students have much better drive. I don't mean this isn't a stereotype really, but it's a compliment.
Yes.
There's a better drive to overcome this kind of adversity. And there's a stick-to-itiveness that I think has been disappearing with a lot of our American students.
Okay.
So, one of my dreams is to go over there and start a wind program, knowing that we're going to have some students that are going to be, they're going to really just try to overcome each obstacle
Right.
in a very, very dedicated, intentional way.
So students who, I guess, start with piano or violin is around age 9, 10 is a good time in their life to pick up a second
Well,
instrument.
maybe think about, playing a wind instrument. Now, if they're playing a violin, that's a great instrument to just stay with.
Right.
I'm thinking more of the piano players who aren't really trying to be piano players,
Yes.
but are looking to participate in something larger. And piano is such a lonely instrument,
Right.
unless you're at such a high level that you're playing good chamber music. And that's only a very small percentage
Yes.
of the overall number of students. So, if they're thinking, I want to do something that I can participate in, so they should think, with the piano background, they'll have good musical background. So say they might want to consider, flute or oboe or the more unusual instruments, bassoon, French horn, or brass instruments, really.
Yes. And you work closely with students who come to St. Paul's and they don't have the skill sets to sit at your orchestra, but they still can pursue their music passion at St. Paul's.
Yes,
right?
absolutely. I mean, once we get our student body, they're not always going to be people off our list. I have a young violist, he's a senior this year, who's actually, I think, headed off to Dartmouth. Now, when he came in here, he was kind of a beginner. We have a very good viola teacher, and he was of a kind of quality of character that said, I want to really do this. And now he gets a beautiful sound. He can play the orchestra music. I know they'd be happy to have him in the Dartmouth Orchestra. And he's, one of those rare finds who really said, okay, I'm going to really continue to pursue this. But we have some beginning everything. I have a young trumpet player now who hadn't had much experience coming in, very, very raw, but he's very smart.
Yes.
And he hasn't quite caught fire yet. But I can sense that if he does, by the time he's a senior, he's going to be playing at a very high level.
Yes.
So our teachers are capable of teaching very, very high-level students, who are coming in already quite capable. But we also understand that we're going to get a number of students who are really fledgling, and we hope to grow them.
Yes.
The one thing, though, when you start an instrument early,
Yes.
I'm sorry, late or early in the St. Paul's career, there are so many other things that they're doing here that they get distracted.
Right.
When they come in with a level of experience, they've already invested a lot of time, and they're not willing to throw it away.
Okay.
So if I get a violinist who's been playing 2 years, there's a pretty good chance that they come here and they'll play a year and then they'll quit. They don't have enough investment. But if you have somebody coming in 10 years, I don't
They'll
think their
continue.
parents, yeah, I don't think their parents would let them quit.
And I think by then music has become a great part
Yes.
of their life.
Yeah,
That
they wouldn't want
yes,
a day without it. And I have
Yes.
a number of kids who are like that. Some terrific students, and even though they're not trying to be musicians, professional musicians,
Yes.
even though some of them might not even play in college,
Yes.
it's been such an important part of their lives, and they've realized all the benefits of learning music.
Yes.
You know, well, there are plenty of benefits that help them academically. I mean, there's
Yes.
all sorts of neuroscience
Right.
on
Right.
what happens when you learn an instrument.
That's why it's so popular in Asia.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Parents.
And the other thing is, you know, American culture, for better or worse, is very strong sports culture. As a
Yes.
teenager, I was much more into athletics than I was
And you're a
music.
coach too.
Well, yeah, I have that label, coach. I don't consider myself really. You know, I help out. You know,
And you have boys.
and I have 4 boys.
Four
Yes,
boys. So, and they're all
and they're all pretty athletic.
yes.
Yeah. I mean, they were raised here, and that's just part of the culture. I mean, when I was 16, if somebody asked me if I thought I was going to be a professional horn player, no, I thought I was going to be an Olympic track star.
But you went to Juilliard.
I didn't have a chance at that, really. But you know, it's such an important part of American culture, and I
Right.
was, you know, in retrospect, do I wish I had practiced a little harder? Yeah, you know, spent a little less time on the football field and more time in the practice room, but that's in retrospect. You wouldn't have been able to tell my 16-year-old self that at all, because you know, even though my dad was a professional musician, and he used to say, hey, listen, you've got talent and you're not going to be a professional football player. And he was completely right, but in my mind, you know, my track team, my football team was really all important.
Yes.
And for a lot of reasons, social mostly.
Right.
American culture has changed a little bit, but it's still very, very strong. That's the team. When we talk about team, if you talk to most of my colleagues here and you think about team efforts, they're going to talk about athletic teams and not necessarily what happens in an orchestra or in a
Right.
chamber music group.
There is a sense of joy and ecstasy when all together
Yes, absolutely.
make one sound.
Yes.
Because that's really hard.
But it's a very painful process.
Yes.
And you know, it takes time. Going into the room and practicing, it's a lonely thing. I recommend to parents, I said, listen, if you have a young child who's interested in music, don't say, okay, go off and practice and yell at them when it doesn't sound good. Go in there and sit with them. Spend
Okay.
a half hour and learn a little bit about the language of music yourself. If you don't know, if you have a child who wants to play the trumpet, right now the trumpet sounds terrible for about a year, and it's very, very painful. You know, but if you say, oh, you have to go
And practice.
into the
practice.
room where we keep the dog, you know, then that child is going to have a hard time.
Right.
But if you take an interest and you maybe go to a lesson and inquire a little bit, and just encouragement and comfort and company, that's very, very valuable.
And you do that here.
Well, we do. What we do is as much as we
Yes.
can. Absolutely. If I'm walking by a practice room and I hear somebody perfecting mistakes or you know exercises in futility sometimes because they don't know, I'll go in and I say, listen, what you're doing, the way you're doing is going to take an hour. If you listen to me, I can make you do that same thing in 20 minutes. And I don't, you know, always insinuate myself on all the students, but if I hear something, and certainly with my own children,
Yes.
my 2 youngest, well, one is playing in college. He's not looking to be a professional musician, but you know, the college that he went to, I mean, the music department loves him because he's really helping them out.
Yes.
And I have another son who plays trumpet here. He's at St. Paul's,
Yes.
and you know, I gave him an instrument pretty early without any expectation. I just showed him how to blow and let him fool around. But when he came of age, I started giving him a little more instruction, and I sat with him. And he's going to be pretty good.
Is there your guideline or advice to the families who is looking to apply to St. Paul's that
Yes.
this is what you should be doing?
Yeah, Gene, that's a really good question because often some people think they have to produce
Yes.
something. And that doesn't help us at all because often the production just kind of hides what we need to learn about the student to help them. So there's a certain level of ability, and it's not as high as people think, that will allow them to come into the orchestra. So I always say, you know, keep it really simple. You know, don't let anybody sell you a bag of goods like, oh, for $1,000 I can make your son sound like Jascha Heifetz. No, you don't want that. We want just find a piece that the student can play well. Something they're very, very comfortable with, so that they can play it accurately and musically and expressively. It doesn't have to be a really difficult piece. And put that on tape. Maybe it's nice to hear the range. If there's a trumpet player, I'd like to, you know, hear how high in the range they can go and what the tone is like. With a violinist, we like to see them be able to get into the third position, you know, with a good sense of intonation. And just, you know, 5 minutes worth of stuff, and we can tell, quite frankly, in 30 seconds.
Yes.
You know, if it's somebody that we want to listen to further. And again, present something that you think is going to make us feel that you're going to contribute to the ensemble that we're trying to maintain or build.
A couple years back, I was actually embarrassed when I brought a boy. Number one, actually, he didn't bring his instrument with him. So you got him a violin and asked him to tune and play. He didn't know how to.
I think I remember that.
Yes.
Yes.
He didn't. He fidgeted.
Violist.
His parents were very nervous, upset, and his father asked why he can't, I guess, tune or set the instrument. And he said his teacher, his tutor, always did it for him. The students should really know their instrument, what they're playing.
Yeah, I mean, if they're going to be what I call recruited musicians, they have to have all that together. Now, we have some students who, our teachers do have to do that. But part of it is we also teach them how to be independent. The best gift you can give your child is independence. And so, as a teacher, I've always said that the best gift I can give my students is musical independence. So they don't really need me anymore to show them everything. I don't always succeed, but that's you know, that's a goal.
Okay. Do you have any final advice or words for the prospective families?
Just
Especially Asia.
think about if you have a really young child and you're looking for further off in the future, you always want to allow the student to find their voice. What instrument appeals to them? And if they're particularly good, it's not a bad idea to steer them toward instruments that might have a better impact. Flute is a great instrument, but if there are a lot of them, and your child is also interested in bassoon, encourage. It's a beautiful voice. The bottom line is every instrument is really beautiful, and you want to play it well. So I know when Bill Clinton was president, we got a ton of saxophone players at these schools. For some reason, because Bill Clinton got up and played the tenor sax, everybody wanted to play saxophone. And here at St. Paul's right now, we have a glut of cellists
Yes.
who are very good. And I don't know what that is, why cello was, but we have really as many cellists as we have violinists, and that's usually unheard of. Viola somehow gets missed in that.
From time to time.
You don't want to pick an instrument simply for its marketability, but it's okay to be exposed to it. And maybe, you know, the child will connect with it.
Yes, great. Okay. Well, I think that was good.
Yeah, okay, excellent.
Thank you.